Meanwhile, Beina was still pondering a perplexing question. Why did the painter have to hide the fact that he had recovered? Could the person who knew this secret be the culprit? Just then, the police unexpectedly raided the villa. They rushed straight into Beina's room. After searching for a while, the two officers noticed a backpack lying on the floor. They also discovered a syringe hidden inside. The nanny feigned surprise and quickly left. In another development, Beina ran to Sunyong to inquire about the situation. Did the painter still take his medication every day? Has Sunyong ever gone to the hospital with him? Sunyong immediately sensed that Beina was reproaching her, as if she hadn't taken good care of the painter. This implied that Sunyong also didn't know that her husband had recovered. A few minutes later, the police arrived and took Beina to the station because they found a syringe in her backpack. Beina looked extremely surprised. Ji-hee and Go-chul had just been released by the police, but they saw Beina being brought there. Ji-hee asked her daughter what had happened. Beina said that the police found a syringe in her backpack. Ji-hee didn't understand the situation at all. The police suspected Beina had injected nicotine into the artist because they found the substance on his body. However, the specific cause still awaited the autopsy results. Meanwhile, Ji-hee, not understanding the situation, went to find Sunyong. Ji-hee suspected that this woman had harmed Beina. Sunyong coldly retorted that she had warned her before, and that if Ji-hee didn't have evidence, she shouldn't speak nonsense. At this point, Ji-hee seemed to have completely lost her mind. Sunyong neither admitted nor denied it. She simply stared at Ji-hee with a cold gaze. When Beina's incident happened, the happiest person was Go-chul because he was the next heir. Ji-hee, however, directed all her suspicions towards Go-chul. She believed he was the one who harmed her daughter, and this was all a series of schemes. Ji-hee and Go-chul opened the safe together. Ji-hee didn't take the will, so Go-chul must have taken it. Go-chul took the will, then eliminated the first heir. This move by Go-chul was truly masterful. At the same time, Beina began to defend herself. The needle alone couldn't prove she was the culprit. Her room door wasn't locked, so anyone could enter. The police of course knew that, so they didn't press the matter further with Beina. Inside the villa, Sunyong began writing a script. The nanny asked Go-chul how they should divide the assets next. Go-chul argued that if the will could be found, the assets would be divided equally. Otherwise, all the assets would belong to Go-chul. Hearing this, the nanny was furious and gritted her teeth. Later, the nanny went to confront Haijun. Haijun had previously said that if Beina went to prison, the nanny would get the money. But now the situation was too advantageous for Go-chul. Haijun told the nanny not to worry, that he had his own way of ensuring she would receive 10% of the inheritance. A little later, while everyone was eating, the doorbell rang. The nanny opened the door and saw Beina, who had just been taken away by the police, suddenly return. The others might be fine, but Go-chul's plan had been turned upside down. The first heir had returned, so Go-chul's dream of seizing all the inheritance was shattered. Beina said that the police had found fingerprints on the syringe, so they would soon know who was responsible. Everyone was stunned. After dinner, Beina asked why the nanny had framed her, but the nanny denied it. Beina said to wait for the fingerprint results before saying anything more. The nanny panicked and immediately confessed everything. She said she found the syringe in the drain while cleaning. However, she didn't mention Haijun at all. She only said it was her idea. Her purpose was to get Ji-hee to hand over the will so the nanny could get 10% of the property belonging to her. Beina felt helpless after hearing this. A little later, she called the whole family together. Beina mentioned that on the night of the incident, everyone heard footsteps but didn't know who made the noise. Beina guessed that the nicotine was injected into the artist by that person. Hearing this, Ji-hee was a little worried. She said that her daughter couldn't jump to conclusions like that, because what if someone woke up in the middle of the night to get a drink of water? Beina replied that it wasn't a problem. It was fine if that person went out to get a drink of water. But in short, everyone who went out that night had to report their whereabouts. Everyone's expressions were unusual. It seemed they had all gone outside. Go-won suddenly brought up an important issue. Go-won asked why the killer had to murder the artist while he had terminal cancer and was about to die. Why the rush to act? Was there some deep-seated feud between them? Beina told the nanny to speak first. It turned out that the artist hadn't taken his medication during this time, and all the medicine had been thrown in the trash. Then, Beina announced that the artist's illness was completely cured. She took out the diagnosis report. At least two people knew about this, Sunyong and Dongwoo. They were with the artist all day, so they would participate in checkups and receive medication with him. Even if the artist tried to hide it, they couldn't have failed to notice. Sunyong said that the artist had suffered a shock a month ago. At that time, she thought his body was getting weaker, so she didn't realize the real situation. But what was the reason for his shock? Dongwoo said he knew the artist had recovered from his illness. However, Dongwoo had no reason to harm the victim. The reason Dongwoo didn't tell anyone was because the artist artist didn't allow it to be revealed. Just then, the police brought the autopsy results. The artist's cause of death wasn't nicotine. Nicotine was injected after he had passed away. The nanny asked the police if they had found any fingerprints on the syringe, but they said there were no fingerprints on it. Hearing this, the nanny turned to look at Beina. She couldn't believe she had been deceived by this girl. Next, the police announced that the artist's cause of death was sleeping pills. He had a severe allergy to them. Sunyong said that her husband had never taken sleeping pills. The artist believed that the pills made people sleepy, which disrupted the body's balance, so he often advised Sunyong to quit. Therefore, the person who gave the victim sleeping pills is the perpetrator. Ji-hee panicked upon hearing this. The autopsy report showed the artist had taken 5 sleeping pills. Ji-hee was utterly astonished because she had only given the artist 1 sleeping pill. This meant someone else was behind it. Beina knew about the sleeping pills at the police station. Beina had instructed the police to arrive a little later because she wanted to investigate further. The results showed that Dongwoo knew the artist had recovered from his illness. A month earlier, Dongwoo had had a fever. Beina began to eliminate every clue. The artist certainly wouldn't have taken sleeping pills intentionally, so why were they in his stomach? That night, everyone had eaten loach soup. Could the soup have been tainted? Ji-hee hid under the covers and sobbed uncontrollably. Beina asked her mother what was wrong, but Ji-hee said she was fine, just wanted to cry. Beina told her mother to cry if she wanted to, as long as she didn't disturb others. The next morning, Ji-hee frankly told the whole story. On the artist's birthday, she received a text message to secretly read the will. Ji-hee gave the artist a sleeping pill. Beina was also surprised that her mother would do such a thing. According to her, 1 pill and 5 pills were essentially the same, both were wrong actions. Fortunately, Ji-hee's intention wasn't to harm the artist. Afterwards, Beina decided to investigate the situation first. However, their conversation was overheard by Goen, who smirked triumphantly. Beina was thinking of a way to deal with the situation when she suddenly remembered something from her childhood. The artist's story was posted online, and netizens commented in droves. Some said Go Chul was the culprit. Some people also say that Ji-hee's bankruptcy is the real culprit. Upon hearing the news of Ji-hee's bankruptcy, Go Chul couldn't hide his smile. The suffering of others was his joy. However, Beina had claimed she was staying there because her house was being renovated. Now that things had turned out this way, Go Chul suspected it was a plan orchestrated by the mother and daughter. Go Chul advised Beina to voluntarily relinquish her inheritance, as it was the quickest way to prove her innocence. Hyejun also agreed. Beina wasn't interested in the inheritance, but giving it up would be tantamount to admitting she had done wrong. Since everyone was so interested in the inheritance, Beina would fight to the end. No one could force her to give it up. While the nanny was washing dishes, Beina suddenly grabbed a cotton swab and started wiping the bowls and spoons. She said she had a friend who worked at a research institute. That friend said that even after washing, the dishes could still show traces of food. The nanny panicked. She suspected Beina was setting a trap for her. After Beina finished speaking, she continued wiping the grinder. This made the nanny worried. A little later, she secretly sneaked into Beina's room. Cotton swabs were on the table. The nanny took out the prepared cotton swabs to change them. But just as she finished changing them, Beina walked in, so she had to pretend to clean up. Beina went to the head of the bed and recorded a very interesting scene. The nanny could no longer deny it. Beina asked her if she wanted to discuss it there or at the police station. The nanny naturally chose to say it right there. It turned out that the nanny had also received a letter. The contents were exactly the same as Ji-hee's letter. The night the nanny was grinding pepper, she had secretly put sleeping pills in it. Because she was doing something bad, she was startled by Ji-hee's sudden appearance. When Ji-hee was about to put the sleeping pills in the water, the nanny had already put them in the soup first. That night, the nanny opened the safe, but there was nothing inside. Beina didn't believe that the person who secretly read the will would be disinherited, so the nanny had to say she hadn't seen anything. After dealing with the nanny, Beina turned to Sunyong. Beina arranged to go for a walk with Sunyong. Then Beina subtly signaled to the nanny. Although the nanny was very reluctant to follow Beina's instructions, she had no choice. Beina had grasped the nanny's weakness. Beina only asked the nanny to find something, but didn't specify what. Therefore, the nanny had no choice but to search every nook and cranny. When Sunyong returned and saw the nanny going out, she immediately realized why Beina had asked her to go out. Beina began to piece together the clues. The artist had taken 5 sleeping pills, but she had only found the source of 2. This meant someone else had given him 3 pills, or 3 people had each given 1 pill. The letter writer was very likely the real culprit. Dinner time arrived quickly. Beina took out the letter and asked who had received it. Go-un said she had received it, but she didn't open it and threw it straight into the storage room. Sunyong had also received the letter. Furthermore, She had opened it, but she hadn't opened the safe. Haijun had also received the letter and hadn't opened the safe either. The nanny and Ji-hee not only received the letter but also opened the safe. Dongwoo had also received the letter, and he had put sleeping pills in the teapot that the artist usually drank from. Dongwoo, out of curiosity, opened the safe, but there was nothing inside. Dongwoo was afraid of being suspected of stealing the will, so before leaving, he wiped away his fingerprints. That's why the police didn't find Dongwoo. If that's the case, then everyone had received the letter, except Go-chul and Beina. Gaejin thought Go-chul must have received it too, so now, only Beina was different from everyone else. Therefore, Haejin suspected that the letter was written by Beina herself. Everyone's gaze towards Beina immediately changed. Go-chul and Haejin went outside. Go-chul said that Beina was becoming increasingly annoying to him, and that he was preparing to carry out his plan. After the letter was exposed, the atmosphere in the family changed. The nanny sharpened her knife in the kitchen. Go-chul searched for a triangle in his study. Dongwoo fell into deep thought. Sunyong secretly went to find Dongwoo. While Beina was sleeping in her room, footsteps suddenly echoed outside. Ji-hee remained asleep. Beina cautiously approached the door. The door suddenly shook violently. It seemed someone was trying to break in. Beina tried to hold the door shut. After a moment, everything became quiet again. Beina mustered up the courage to open the door. At that moment, a figure suddenly approached. Beina immediately woke up and realized it was just a nightmare. She got out of bed and opened the door. Haejin happened to hear the noise, so he took off his headphones and went outside. Beina was thirsty, so she went to the kitchen to get some water. Haejin stood behind her, silently observing her. After Beina finished drinking, a person appeared behind her. Unexpectedly, Beina's dream came true. Beina fell to the ground and bled profusely. Haejin rushed over and was about to call an ambulance. But Haejin suddenly thought that Beina's death would be a good thing. Since no one saw him, Haejin could just pretend he hadn't been there. Poor Beina lay on the ground, uncared for. After Haejin returned to his room, he couldn't sleep. He just sat there waiting for news. Finally, someone discovered Beina. Haejin pretended to be surprised and ran outside to see. The house was in complete chaos. Beina's condition was unknown. An ambulance quickly arrived. Ji-hee also went to the hospital with them. Haejin suspected Go-chul was responsible because last night he had said he wanted to deal with Beina, but Go-chul adamantly denied it. In any case, Haejin had no evidence. Fortunately, Beina's life wasn't in danger. After her wounds were bandaged, she was almost completely recovered. This time, Ji-hee was truly panicked. She only wanted money, while the people in the villa wanted to kill her daughter. This terrified Ji-hee. But Beina was quite calm. She had to return to the villa to deal with this. While Ji-hee was going to complete the discharge procedures, Beina suddenly received a message. Beina opened it and discovered it was from a group of online detectives. They were very interested in the artist's affairs. Everyone's situation was being thoroughly investigated. Beina suddenly remembered Goen. Beina immediately went to ask her what was going on. Goen took out her phone and called Beina. They were standing next to each other, but still calling each other. Beina didn't understand why Goen had to do that. Goen explained that she didn't want others to think they were close, but standing next to each other and calling like this was a bit strange. Afterwards, Beina returned to her room. She knew that the online detective group was created by Goen. The power of the internet is immense, so everyone's private life is investigated. Most notably, Go-chul is the subject of much scrutiny. Everyone initially thought he only had 5 prior convictions, but unexpectedly, he also had an affair. The two girls watched the information intently, and their relationship grew closer. Goen has a habit of documenting her life. On the artist's birthday, she recorded many videos. Perhaps there's a clue in them. Goen knew Ji-hee had been to the artist's room before, but Ji-hee was interrupted by the nanny and prevented by Go-chul. Having no other choice, Ji-hee resorted to sleeping pills. Besides those 3, Haejin had also been to the artist's room. He claimed he received a warning email from the school and wanted to destroy it before the artist discovered him. Although Haejin said that, his real purpose was to open the safe. In fact, Haejin was the first person to enter the room. Ji-hee was the second person. She used the excuse of hiding a gift to surprise the artist. Then came the nanny, who claimed to be cleaning. Finally, there was Go-chul. He said he came to see the artist because he had something to discuss. After Ji-hee left, Go-chul went straight to the safe. Then, the nanny returned. Go-chul and Ji-hee used the same method. They both told her to leave because they had something to discuss. But just as Go-chul dismissed the nanny, he was startled by the ringing of his phone. Then Go-chul discovered Haejin hiding there. They looked at each other in astonishment. This meant Haejin was the first to enter the room, and he and Go-chul were the last to stay. Both of them had lied. Go-chul had a fluorescent substance on his hand. Therefore, it was highly likely that they had both seen the will. On the night of the artist's birthday party, Go-eun had also recorded a video. Go-yoon and Beina watched the video together, but they still found no new clues. Beina lay on the sofa and fell asleep. A childhood trauma resurfaced, causing Beina to wake up with a start. Meanwhile, the nanny was preparing to do the laundry. She discovered another blood-stained sock and was terrified. The nanny didn't understand why she kept seeing such things. At that moment, she didn't know who to talk to. Just then, Dongwoo passed by, so the nanny decided to tell him. Meanwhile, the online detectives had found another clue. They discovered the nanny had put sleeping pills in the pepper grinder. This detail was already known. The important thing was that Go-chul was also up to something. Previously, everyone only suspected Go-chul had put the pills in, but now that suspicion had become a reality. 4 pills had been found, but Beina still didn't know who put the last one. However, the person who put the pills in was just a tool. The letter sender was the real culprit. Even so, that possibility wasn't entirely certain. The letter only mentioned the location of the will. The writer didn't mention sleeping pills at all. Sleeping pills were just a figment of everyone's imagination. If both the letter and the sleeping pills were part of the plan, then this is truly terrifying. Who could have devised such a scheme? Suddenly, an argument erupted outside. It turned out Dongwoo was questioning Hae-jun. He said the blood-stained sock belonged to Hae-jun. Dongwoo also said that if Hae-jun remained silent, he would only make himself appear to be Beina's attacker. Therefore, Hae-jun could only admit that he was a witness to the incident. Go-chul was about to call the police to deal with Hae-jun, but Hae-jun's single sentence immediately silenced Go-chul. Next, Go-chul produced an audio recording. It was a recording of Ji-hye confessing everything to Beina. It also included a conversation between Beina and Go-chul. Not only that, the recording contained almost everyone's voices. Hae-jun admitted that he had installed listening devices throughout the rooms, with the aim of finding the culprit who harmed the artist. Sunyong believed Hae-jun had violated someone's privacy, so she insisted on calling the police. Beina shared the same opinion. However, the others had all spoken ill of the artist, so if the police arrived, things would become very complicated. Therefore, everyone advised Sunyong to handle the matter herself. Finally, Sunyong agreed not to report it to the police, but she insisted on calling a lawyer. Unexpectedly, the lawyer brought crucial news. The artist had adopted Hae-jun, meaning the inheritance that originally belonged to Beina would be divided equally between them. That's why Hae-jun wanted to eliminate Beina, because without Beina, all the assets would belong to Hae-jun. Of course, if they could find the lost will, the assets would be divided equally among them, but no matter what, anyone involved in the artist's death would be disinherited. Go-chul understood that he had drugged the artist, so under no circumstances would he receive any share of the money. Therefore, Go-chul had to quickly think of another way. The adoption news completely astonished Sunyong. She didn't know what other surprises awaited her. Ji-hye, however, was only interested in the inheritance. Everyone already knew about Ji-hye's poisoning, so even if they found the will, she certainly wouldn't get a share. Therefore, Ji-hye thought it would be better not to search anymore. That way, Beina could get 50% of the inheritance. Beina was speechless upon hearing this. A moment later, Ji-hye went to investigate Sunyong. Ji-hye suspected that the weapons Sunyong usually used to attack Beina was the golf club she usually used. But Ji-hye was not on the same level as Sunyong. As soon as Ji-hye mentioned the golf club, Sunyong knew what she intended to do. Meanwhile, Go-chul was turning over his shoes to search. Unfortunately, Go-chul found nothing, so Go-chul angrily ran to find Hae-jun. Luckily, Dongwoo arrived in time, otherwise they would have gotten into a fight. Go-chul angrily claims that Hae-jun stole the will. However, Dongwoo doesn't care about that. Dongwoo suddenly goes back to his room to find an old newspaper. Meanwhile, Go-chul and the nanny are searching for the will at Hae-jun's place, while Ji-hye and Beina are searching in the artist's studio. Finally, Beina finds it, but Ji-hye prevents Beina from revealing it publicly. Ji-hye says that if everyone knows, they will only get 20% of the inheritance, but if not, they will get 50%. This leads to a heated argument between mother and daughter. Sunyong hears the commotion and runs over. This time, the secret can no longer be kept. Unless something unexpected happens, the inheritance will be divided equally among everyone. Currently, only family members know about the sleeping pills. The police and lawyers are still unaware, but the problem is, they've only found 4 sleeping pills so far. One is still missing. According to Go-yoon's speculation, if it wasn't Hae-jun who put the sleeping pills in, then it must have been Sunyong. Both of them are highly suspicious. Beina discovered that Hae-jun had given the artist a box of chocolates on his birthday. Although the artist had already eaten dinner, he still had the habit of eating chocolate. However, there were 12 chocolates in the box, so the artist couldn't have eaten them all. Where did the rest go? Beina and Go-eun then decided to investigate Hae-jun. It's very possible that the chocolates contain sleeping pills. Additionally, Beina suspected Sunyong had given the artist macarons, and it's possible those also contain sleeping pills. Therefore, this investigation targeted both Haijun and Sunyong. Go-eun sent them a picture with the message, "I know what happened on his birthday. Let's meet in the parking garage." Then, Beina and Go-eun hid in their car to observe. The first person to arrive was Sunyong, the most difficult to deal with. Sunyong said she had received the message, and if the other party felt the macarons were problematic, they should take them for testing. It seemed Sunyong wasn't the one who drugged them. Since the two girls couldn't wait for Haijun, they went to the artist's room to look for the chocolate, but they couldn't find it. Go-eun thought Haijun might have destroyed it. A little later, Haijun entered the room. This only reinforced their belief that the box of chocolates was problematic. The sudden appearance of the two girls startled Haijun. He insisted that the chocolates were fine. Beina then made Haijun eat a piece to prove it. Haijun wasn't afraid and put the chocolate in his mouth. But when Haijun ate the third piece, he finally couldn't bear it anymore and fell asleep. No matter how much they called him, Haijun wouldn't wake up. When Haijun woke up, he was at the police station. Haijun refused to be arrested alone, so he insisted on taking the others with him. Ji-hee, Go-chul, Dong-woo, and the nanny couldn't escape. That also means those 5 people have been disinherited. A short while later, Beina handed the letter to the police. Beina said that although the person who poisoned the victim had been arrested, the letter sender was the mastermind. However, Beina argued that there was no need to jump to conclusions about the letter. First, she rearranged the order of those who entered the artist's room. Ji-hee entered at 2 hours and 1 minute in the evening. Go-chul entered at 2:30 in the evening and took the will. Next was Haejun, then the nanny. The last person was Dong-woo, who wiped away his fingerprints before leaving. The artist's death occurred between 11:30 in the morning and 12 midnight. This means that by the time the others entered the room, the victim was already dead. Then, the police continued to rearrange the order of poisoning. The first was the nanny. She put sleeping pills in the fish soup, and the victim drank it all. The second were Ji-hee and Go-chul. Go-chul put 1 pill in the medicine box. Ji-hee also put a pill in. The artist was drinking tea while taking the medicine, so Dong-woo counts as the second person. The last person was Haijun. He put the medicine in the chocolate box. That night, someone entered Beina's room. It was Sunyong. That scene was a reminder of Beina's terrifying past. Could it be that Sunyong was the one who had been harming Beina all along? Although the police had identified the people who put the sleeping pills in, the specific culprit could not yet be determined. If there were no results after 48 hours, they would be released. Television stations were vying to report on this case. This could be considered an extremely rare case. The statements of the 5 people who put the pills in were basically the same. They all admitted that putting the pills in was wrong. However, none of them knew that the artist was allergic to sleeping pills. In other words, they originally had no intention of harming the artist. Therefore, the court could not approve the arrest warrant. The 5 were released for further investigation. A few days after the artist passed away, his family finally began organizing the funeral. 5 people arrived late and hurriedly took their seats. After the priest finished his speech, it was Sunyong's turn to speak. A new character appeared at the funeral. When Sunyong spoke, her expression was very strange. Beina stared at Sunyong intently. She suspected that Sunyong's sorrowful expression was just a pretense. The scene rewinds to the night of 3 days prior. Beina suddenly woke up from her dream. She looked at the clock and saw it was just past 3 a.m. Initially, Beina intended to sleep a little longer, but she heard a very strange sound. Even wearing headphones didn't help, so she couldn't sleep. Therefore, Beina ran to find Go-eun. Go-eun was also awake. The 2 girls began investigating the real culprit. They desperately wanted to know who intended to kill the artist. The artist had once made the nanny write a self-criticism report, so she angrily chopped up a chicken. Dong-woo always appeared to be a good person, but the truth might not be so. Haijun looks quite normal, but occasionally he gives off a frightening vibe. His gaze towards the artist is also unsettling. Ji-hee is a materialistic woman. Go-chul is also a money-hungry man. He's been involved in many scams but has never killed anyone. Therefore, those 2 are temporarily ruled out. Sunyong is very cunning, but her motives are unclear. The 2 girls began to study the letter. The handwriting was cut from a magazine, so they had no way to distinguish it. Then the 2 girls searched each room, but in the end, they found nothing. The conversation rewinds to 2 days earlier. Beina and Go-eun are still racking their brains trying to figure out who sent the letter. Go-eun suggests a possibility. One of the 5 people who drugged the letter might have pretended to receive it. This way, he wouldn't be suspected of being the sender. Sunyong overheard their conversation. While Go-eun was having breakfast, she tried to subtly probe Sunyong. Go-eun asked Sunyong who she suspected was the sender of the letter. Sunyong's answer left Go-eun speechless. Just then, the police arrived. This time, they also came to inquire about the sender of the letter. The sender's identity was too too mysterious, so the police had no clues, nor did the people in the villa. Therefore, everyone decided to temporarily put aside the letter. For now, they focused on the artist's shock a month ago. Sunyong said that there was nothing unusual at the time. She thought the artist had cancer and was having frequent episodes. Why did the police bring it up? Because they had investigated at the hospital, but there was no record of this in the files. Then, the police told Beina to ask the main attending physician, the same one who was present at the funeral. The doctor said that the artist's shock was nothing unusual, so he didn't keep any records. To find out the specifics, Beina could ask the person who was with the artist that day. But Beina said that if that person were willing to speak, she wouldn't have to come here to ask the doctor. If the patient's family doesn't speak, the doctor can't reveal anything either. Although Beina didn't get many questions, she at least knew one thing for sure. The artist's drug overdose a month ago definitely had a problem. The person accompanying the artist that day was Sunyong. Therefore, Sunyong was the biggest culprit. Sunyong is a famous director and screenwriter. She has received numerous awards. Could this be a play she orchestrated herself? Currently, Sunyong is completely the victim. Initially, Sunyong's family happiness was destroyed by another woman. Then, when her husband fell ill, Sunyong gave up her career to stay home and care for him. Sunyong has always silently sacrificed without expecting anything in return. Sunyong even published a book containing the quote, "Those who don't cross the line won't understand the dangers and horrors of the outside world." Beina felt this quote was directed at Sunyong herself. It was late, so everyone went to bed. That night, Beina slept in the tent with Go-won. Since the artist's incident, the two girls' relationship had improved, but they still hadn't found the real culprit. The story rewinds to the day before. The 5 people who poisoned the artist had been released. They were also very curious to know who sent the letter. In everyone's mind, the letter was the cause of this whole affair. If it weren't for it, they wouldn't have put sleeping pills in the artist's food. Therefore, they desperately wanted to know who used the will to lure them in. When the will was mentioned, Beina remembered the lawyer. Besides the artist, only the female lawyer knew the contents of the will beforehand. However, the lawyer had no motive for the crime, because even if the artist died, she wouldn't receive any inheritance. So who else could have read the will beforehand? The lawyer revealed that the artist wrote the will when he was diagnosed with terminal cancer. 6 months ago, he revised it again. Later, he edited it several more times. The lawyer also revealed something to Beina. Sunyong had mentioned remarriage, but the artist apparently disagreed. Afterward, he suffered a drug overdose. This only increased Beina's suspicion of Sunyong. Just then, the doctor unexpectedly called Beina aside. The doctor said that the artist's overdose was also due to sleeping pills. Sunyong had instructed the doctor to keep this a secret and erase the treatment records. Therefore, Sunyong had known about the artist's allergy to sleeping pills a month prior. Immediately afterward, Beina stopped Sunyong's car. Beina wanted to speak with Sunyong privately. This surprised everyone else. Beina was very brave to go with Sunyong alone. After the truth was revealed, Sunyong didn't panic at all. She said that if Beina claimed her love had turned into hatred for the artist, that would be fine. If Beina considered this her plan, that was also acceptable. But since Beina had no evidence, Sunyong refused to admit it. Beina understood that her mother couldn't compete with this woman, and neither could she. Sunyong turned to Beina and said that she was very pitiful. From childhood to adulthood, Beina had never received true love. Her mother only knew how to go out and find men, and her father didn't care about his daughter at all. Those words brought back childhood traumas for Beina. Her heart suddenly ached so much she couldn't breathe. Then, Sunyong dropped Beina off by the roadside. Only when she got out of the car did Beina feel a little better. At that moment, she remembered the time she fell into the water. In the villa, the nanny decided to go on strike. She also wanted to experience the life of the rich. The nanny's inaction annoyed everyone. No one cooked, no one did the laundry. If this continued, the whole family would starve. Even though the nanny wasn't working, she refused to leave because her previous salary hadn't been paid yet. A little later, Beina returned. Beina stood opposite Sunyong. The atmosphere suddenly became quiet. Ji-hee and Go-chul were both bewildered. Ji-hee asked her daughter what had happened, but Beina said she was fine. Ji-hee and Go-chul didn't know how to cook, so they just ate instant noodles. After the artist's death, another shocking piece of news surfaced online. Previously, someone had copied his paintings. Experts analyzed them and concluded that it was highly likely the 2 paintings were by the same person. This meant the artist had forged the paintings himself. Go-chul ran to ask Dongwoo what had happened, because the fake painting was something he had obtained from someone else. Dongwoo told Go-chul not to speak so loudly. This time, time, he had made a considerable amount of money, so he shouldn't be too greedy. Just then, the nanny suddenly appeared. She asked if the greed was related to the inheritance, but the two men ignored her. The next day, the 5 people who had lost their inheritance suddenly had a chance to change the situation. If they could blame everything on the letter sender, they would no longer be involved in the artist's death. The letter sender would certainly not be easy to find, but that person could be faked. They planned to find someone to come forward and claim to be the letter sender. Then, the remaining people would get the treasure and divide it among themselves. This plan sounded great, but the problem was, who would volunteer to do it? Everyone's eyes immediately turned to the nanny. Go Chul and Ji-hee still had children. Hae-jun was young and had a bright future. Therefore, only the nanny was the most suitable person. She just needed to say she didn't know the artist was allergic to sleeping pills, and then she would suffer for a few days. In return, she could get 5 billion won for those few days. So this sounded very reasonable. The nanny felt she could do it, but she needed to prepare thoroughly. Ji-hee and Go Chul began practicing with the nanny. At the same time, Beina and Go-un sneaked into Sunyong's room. The computer in the room was still on. Inside was a picture of the treasure that was exactly the same as the one in the letter. This proved that Sunyong was involved in sending the letter. In another development, Hae-jun also had a treasure map in his hands. He began searching for something in the artist's study. At that moment, someone entered, causing Hae-jun to quickly hide. The person who came was the nanny. The young man silently observed her. It turned out there was a secret room. This room was the nanny's treasure trove. Previously, this woman had stolen quite a few things. Not long after, the nanny was ready to turn herself in. At the same time, Beina was considering whether she should report Sunyong. The clues she had were enough to prove Sunyong was the sender of the letter. The nanny ran to turn herself in, but the police didn't believe her. At that moment, Beina called the police. Beina wanted to report Sunyong. A short while later, Sunyong returned to find Beina waiting. Beina knew that the other party hated the artist and had wanted to kill him for a long time. But until a month ago, Sunyong had found the most cruel method to have the artist killed by his own relatives. Because Sunyong always preferred to use evidence to speak, Beina had prepared proof in advance. Sunyong's computer contained a map of the safe deposit box. She even demanded that the artist remarry. She also instructed the doctor to conceal the fact that the artist was allergic to sleeping pills. Sunyong claimed the map on the computer wasn't hers, but she refused to reveal its origin. Beina, having only found that much, dared to question her. Beina truly underestimated Sunyong. She couldn't understand why this woman was so frantic. However, Sunyong shifted the topic to Beina's past. She always brought it up whenever she couldn't win an argument. This tactic proved very effective, as it always swayed Beina. Sun warned Beina not to provoke her, as Beina would be the one most hurt. This woman always reopened other people's wounds. Therefore, Beina had to reopen Sunyong's old wounds as well. In reality, Sunyong was just as pitiful as Beina. Sunyong had been begging for love for 20 years without success. She wanted it, but couldn't have it, and she couldn't bear to let go. For 20 years, Sunyong had been with her ex-husband without any official status, and there was nothing to be proud of. Sunyong wasn't angry at all, contrary to Beina's expectations. On the contrary, she calmly encouraged Beina. Her attitude was even more frightening. In another corner, Hae-jun was looking at a photo of herself with her father. That man had been missing for many years. This house truly held too many secrets. It seemed everyone had a past they didn't want anyone to know. Beina could never win against Sunyong. Every time, Beina was left speechless, but Beina still proactively challenged Sunyong. As Beina was about to enter her room, she suddenly noticed something. She went to the clock. She saw a camera installed on it. This was a huge discovery. Beina took out the memory card and opened it. She was surprised to find that the sender of the letter was the artist. This time, he had decided to risk his own life. What was this man's ultimate goal? No one knows what kind of person he is, and how many secrets this house hides. Hae-jun's purpose is not just the property. Hae-jun's eavesdropping wasn't to find the murderer of the artist, but to uncover the truth about his father's death. When Hae-jun overheard the conversation between the artist and Dong-woo, he knew of the existence of the recording. The artist had been using it to blackmail his assistant. The recording contained the truth about Hae-jun's father's death. Dong-woo is the real culprit in the past incident. Meanwhile, Beina is completely devastated after discovering that her father sent the letter. She had already lacked a father's love love and didn't know what kind of person he was, so now she feels even more alienated. Beina decides to show the video to Go-eun. Go-eun is also shocked by what happened. Could it be that when the artist sent the letter, he had already decided to end his life? If so, this incident will end his own life. But the artist had recovered from cancer. Why would he make such a negative choice? The artist's act of sending the letter could be interpreted as him wanting to probe people's greed. However, sacrificing his life was too great a price to pay. At the same time, Hae-jin opened the nanny's treasure chest. He searched every corner of the house, but he still couldn't find the recording the artist mentioned. The nanny's treasure chest was Hae-jin's last hope. Over the years, this woman had stolen quite a few things. However, the recording device was hidden inside a vase. Hae-jin clearly remembered that his father had brought the recording device here that year. Meanwhile, Beina and Go-eun began to investigate the matter. Assuming the artist only wanted to play a game and had no intention of dying, then who turned everything into such a tragedy? Who could have foreseen the victim's plan? Sunyong, Ji-hee, and Dong-woo were three people quite close to the artist. There was also the nanny, as she knew the house best. As for Ji-hee and Go-chul, both were disliked by the artist, so they probably wouldn't know his plan. Go-eun suggested showing them the video. They were both older and more experienced. Furthermore, Go-chul, being a con artist by profession, understood the situation. After Ji-hee and Go-chul found out about the artist's letter, they were also very surprised. Ji-hee, besides being surprised, couldn't offer any help. Go-chul had never encountered such a large-scale prank before, so he didn't know how to handle it. Not long after, the police arrived to find Sunyong. It turned out that Beina had proactively reported Sunyong. Sunyong was furious and glared at Beina. After the woman was taken away, Go-chul began to piece together the clues. Go-chul suggested that the artist had probably actually ended his own life. The artist knew he was allergic to sleeping pills, yet he deliberately sent letters to test everyone's loyalty. Clearly, the artist wanted everyone to be implicated. In other words, the artist didn't want to share his inheritance with anyone other than Beina. Ordinary artists are very strange. They only like to do what they like. That's why Go-chul came to that conclusion. At the same time, Hae-jin started listening to the audio recording. It turned out that the artist was the one who had swindled all of Hae-jin's father's money. That day, Hae-jin's father went to the artist's house to demand money. But not only did Hae-jin's father not get the money, he also lost his life there. Hae-jin's father's name was In-guk. The In-guk Foundation, which received 20% of the will, was named after Hae-jin's father. 15 years had passed, and finally Hae-jin knew the heartbreaking truth. Hae-jin's tears flowed incessantly. After overcoming his grief, Hae-jin regained his spirits and began to think of ways to avenge his father. At the same time, Go-chul arranged to meet Ji-hee to discuss the matter. Go-chul had a way to retain 10% of their assets. The first step was to steal the video. Only with the video in hand could Go-chul and Ji-hee gain the upper hand. This crucial task was entrusted to Ji-hee. Ji-hee absolutely had to prevent Beina and Go-eun from discovering the situation. Those two girls didn't understand the importance of money. They were solely focused on finding the truth. Go-chul and Ji-hee's goals were completely opposite. They didn't care about the truth. They only wanted the money. Just then, a mysterious person secretly slipped a letter into the box. Ji-hee began secretly stealing the video. Meanwhile, Go-chul stood guard outside. After obtaining the video, Go-chul immediately deleted the original copy. This was completely outside the original plan. Ji-hee witnessed the incident and suddenly became worried. If Beina found out, Ji-hee would surely be criticized by her daughter. At the police station, Sunyong stubbornly refused to say anything. She decided to remain silent until the very end. This gave the police a headache. They had never seen such a stubborn woman. At this point, Sunyong finally spoke up. She asserted that the item was not hers and that she didn't know who it belonged to. After saying this, Sunyong prepared to leave, but she was stopped by the police. Sunyong demanded that the other party produce the arrest warrant. The police remained silent.